Sleep is a luxury when the winds pay a visit, for they cry out loud, yearning for company. They have nature as a companion, but nature howls out loud, and the winds howl out along with her, howling for the moon in the morning, crying for the sun at midnight. It tears my heart apart, for that sound is raw. That sound comes from nature's heart, from within the winds, for nature can be wild. Nature, too, can cry. This is Carolina Haints. Welcome, dear listener, to the Carolina Haints podcast, brought to you by Wreak Havoc Productions and A Darker World. I'm your host, Dan Sellers. Roan Mountain straddles the border of North Carolina and Tennessee, north of Mount Mitchell. In 1887, a large hotel was built right on the peak of the mountain. The Cloudland Hotel got its name from the cloud cover that engulfs the mountaintop over 70% of the time. However, when the clouds weren't blocking the view, they claimed that over 100 mountain peaks could be seen from the hotel's wraparound porch. Oddly, the Cloudland was one of the few places on Earth where you could actually see your own shadow while in the fog. Like so many other turn-of-the-century mountaintop resorts, the hotel catered to many people looking to escape the sweltering North Carolina summers. Charles Dudley Warner wrote about his stay at the Cloudland. In addition to there being no hay fever, quote, "The air is full of electricity with its health-giving influence. There are no snakes, no mosquitoes, and none of the little pests that crawl in the night and fly in the noonday," end quote. But he also said that it rocked like a ship at sea when the wind blew. This last statement was a testament to the poor construction quality of the building and the problems associated with maintaining the remote hotel at a time when the only mode of transportation was a horse and cart. One interesting story that came out of the Cloudland Hotel was of a greedy North Carolina sheriff. There was a line drawn down the middle of the dining room, and if the wrong guest didn't pay attention and crossed over the line, the sheriff would be there to collect his due. You see, alcohol was legal in Carter County, Tennessee, but not in Mitchell County, North Carolina. If a guest crossed the line with a drink in their hand, the sheriff would levy a hefty fine, payable in cash, immediately. The hotel closed around 1910 due to the high cost of maintenance. Within 5 years of being abandoned, the hotel had completely collapsed from the harsh weather environment and the shoddy construction. The property was sold to the U.S. Forest Service, and today the only thing that remains is a plaque along the Appalachian Trail that marks where the hotel once stood. But our tale isn't about the Cloudland Hotel and its shady shyster sheriff. No, our tale is about the mountain itself. Roan Mountain has many unique properties. To start with, it's a bald mountain, which means that, geographically speaking, there is no reason why it shouldn't be covered with lush, thick forest, like the rest of the North Carolina Appalachian Mountains. But instead, it's covered by native grasses and shrubs. I mean, technically, geographically speaking, Roan isn't even a mountain, but a high ridge that spans 5 miles. There are species of plants that were first discovered here on the mountain, like the gray lily and the Catawba rhododendron. But these two plants couldn't be more opposite. The gray lily, discovered by the father of American botany, Dr. Asa Gray, is delicate and endangered. The slightest touch from a human could kill it. while the Catawba rhododendron thrive here. Roan Mountain boasts the largest natural rhododendron field of its type on Earth. When in full bloom, the 600-acre field can be seen as far away as 12 miles. Roan, like so many other bald mountains, is a scientific mystery. As the definition states, the forest trees should grow here, but they simply don't. Of course, there are several theories and legends that try to explain it. One of these comes from the Catawba Indian tribe. Long ago, the Catawba used the Roan Mountain as their battlefield. The mountain was sacred to the Catawba. They considered it a place of powerful magic. They believed that the elevated height made it easier for fallen warriors to find their way to the great spirits of the native traditions. It was said that back then several tribes sought to dominate the Pisgah forest, so the Catawba proposed a kind of battle royale. All the tribes would meet on Roan Mountain and fight it out until only one remained. The Catawba came out victorious, but it was a hard-fought battle with many casualties. Their story claims that a copious amount of blood spilled that day choked out all the trees on the mountain. They say that the great nature spirit replaced the trees with the rhododendron, and their bright red blossoms as a tribute to the fallen. Another peculiarity about the mountain is that one may catch a glimpse of a halo rainbow. A rainbow that, instead of arcing across the horizon, forms a complete circle. A halo rainbow, sometimes called God's halo, is extremely rare. It takes a combination of being at a great height as well as the perfect atmospheric conditions. Typically, these are only seen by pilots, but these are just the beginning of the peculiar aspects of Roan Mountain. Roan is also said to have a light phenomena reminiscent of the Brown Mountain lights. Many overnight hikers have reported having the trail ahead of them blocked by a glowing ball of energy. Oddly, the ball was only self-illuminating. It glowed in the darkness, but it did not light up anything around it. The ball is said to sway back and forth for several seconds and then recede down the trail. Those who tried to follow it say it quickly vanished without a trace. Also, the slopes of Roan Mountain are haunted by a bull. The story tells of a ruthless cattle rancher with an equally ornery bull. The bull was the biggest in the county and hated everyone. The rancher would let him roam free, and many unsuspecting travelers were injured by his sharp horns. The bull would charge anyone that wasn't his owner, and that's the way the rancher liked it. One morning, he rode up onto the mountain and found his bull dead, shot to death. The old rancher just turned his horse around and rode back home. He left the huge bull there to rot in the summer sun. Now it's said if you walk through what you think is an empty clearing, don't be surprised if you hear the snorting of a bull, the pounding of its hooves. Some have even claimed to see the apparition of the bull charging them, only to have it fade away as it gets closer. But don't worry, there's also a normal human ghost on Roan. At least one. His name was Jenkins, and he was having an affair with a woman named Delinda. That is, until his wife found out about it. Soon, Jenkins found himself in the same predicament as the old rancher's bull, shot to death somewhere up on the mountain. But he wasn't left there to rot. He was laid to rest in the cemetery on Old Hollow Road. And about the same time, Delinda disappeared. One version of the story says that Jenkins's wife shot her too. But another tale says that she was so distraught by Jenkins's death that she climbed into his coffin and allowed herself to be buried along with him. Cars parked near the cemetery have been shaken by an unseen force that people say is the restless spirit of the dead couple. But perhaps the most peculiar thing about Roan Mountain are the winds and what they bring. Due to the shape of the mountain and the lack of tree cover, the mountain is extremely windy. A survey team exploring the peak in 1799 said that, quote, "The wind has such power on top of the mountain that the ground is blowed in deep holes all over the northwest side," end quote. Local farmers talked about this devil's wind that would spin the clouds around the top of the mountain in a circle. It was this harsh wind that made maintenance on the Cloudland Hotel unmanageable and ultimately led to its closure. But the most peculiar thing was the noises that the wind brought. People have claimed to hear bizarre music and strange singing in the wind of the mountain. If it were just music alone, it would be easy to dismiss it as a result of the wind howling. But voices? It's known as the Phantom Choir of the Roan. But those who have heard it say firsthand that it's anything but heavenly. It was described by some as, quote, "a horrid, wretched song of mankind in torment." Of course, guests of Cloudland heard the phenomena, and soon word quickly spread beyond the Pisgah forest. The voices of the Catawba warriors could be heard on Roan Mountain. Some patrons even came to the hotel specifically to experience the choir. One such man was a scientist named Henry E. Colton. He wrote, quote,
"The sound was very plain to the ear, like the incessant, continuous, and combined snap of two glass jars being tapped together. It was always loudest and most prolonged just after there would be a thunderstorm. I used every argument I could to persuade myself that it was simply a result of some common cause and to shake the faith of the country people in its mysterious origin. They continue to believe that the music comes from angels, but I only convinced myself that it was the result from two currents of air meeting each other in the suck between the two peaks where there was no obstruction of trees, one containing a greater and the other a lesser amount of electric energy."
Another story is told of an arrogant young French nobleman who read Colton's article and set out to solve the enigma himself. His true name has been forgotten, but he's most commonly referred to as Père Liberel in the stories. He was young and rich and full of hubris and arrogance, in the way that only the young and rich can be. He arrived at Cloudland in the summer, when afternoon thunderstorms are most likely to occur. He declared to all that he was there to solve the mystery of the Phantom Choir, once and for all. Sure enough, very soon the day came when all the conditions seemed to be right. The hotel manager warned him that it would most likely be that afternoon, but that only encouraged him. He recalled Colton's finding that the voices often came with the winds, but not always, and was usually loudest after a thunderstorm. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The manager begged him to at least take some precautions. The voices are the least of the dangers on the mountain. Traveling alone in a storm and fog, one could easily lose their bearings, and there was also the occasional bear to consider. But the arrogant Frenchman simply cut a walking stick from a nearby tree and said, "I got this," or whatever the turn-of-the-century equivalent of that phrase would have been. Witnesses say he left the hotel wearing blue pants and plaid shirt and carrying his new walking stick. He took no provisions, not even a canteen. He walked for quite some time, and then he thought he heard a faint humming noise. He He followed it and, yes, he realized that he was hearing the infamous Roan choir. But at the same moment, there was a massive crack of thunder, and the wind increased drastically. The sky opened up, and he found himself in the harshest thunderstorm he had ever experienced. The wind increased to such ferocity that he had to crawl on his hands and knees. He crawled over the mountain face and came upon a low, overhanging rock. It was big enough for him to sit underneath, out of the rain, with his back against the mountain. He was trapped there for over an hour, rain-soaked, listening to the wind howling, startled by the thunder cracking, and throughout it all was the constant drone of the phantom choir. It didn't sound like a choir to him. It sounded like torture, designed to drive him mad. Suddenly, the mountain was no longer behind him. Instead, it was a small, deep cave. Was it there the whole time, or had he just noticed? Was this what the surveyor meant when he said the wind could blow holes in the mountain? He hardly had time to think of these questions, much less answer them, because when the cave opened up, he fell backwards into it. Later, he would be convinced that he was pulled into it, but he fell backwards and hit his head. For the next few minutes, he wasn't entirely sure if he was conscious or not. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the source of the voices. He saw the choir. His initial feelings were now confirmed. This was no choir of angels. This was a scene straight out of Dante's own nightmares.
The phantom singers were inhuman, though human forms they bore. Some were missing arms, others had legs broken, their brittle bones exposed. All exhibited deep gashes in their flesh. Their singing was accompanied by a staccato of teeth inside their open mouths. So most of the singers wore only their tattered flesh. Bits of clothing clung to oozing places on one and another of the mournful horde. They definitely were not Indians killed in battle, for one or two of the tortured singers wore manufactured shoes that were markedly different from the moccasins of American Indians.
It was then that he knew the phantom choir of Roan was sung by the souls of the damned. If he was conscious throughout all of this, it was then that he lost it. He blacked out. When he came to, the infernal music had faded, and the rains reduced to drippings from the rocks. He emerged from the rock overhanging to receding clouds that revealed the bluest sky he had ever seen. He looked out at the horizon and saw the most beautiful ring of shimmering colors hanging in the air, where the maddening onslaught of rain had been just a few minutes earlier. It was God's halo. Despite the hotel manager's concerns, Liberlet did not lose his way in the storm. He knew the way back to the hotel and he used it. He rushed back to the Cloudland as fast as he possibly could. When he burst through the doors, those who saw him looked into the dead eyes of someone in shock. They also asked him what had happened to his clothes. He was now completely dressed in white clothes that were worn and disheveled. He didn't stop to answer their inquiries. He walked straight to his room, gathered his things, and left the mountain forever. The legend says that the wind was such a violent force that it blew the color from his clothes. It was many years before he would ever speak of his experiences on the mountain. But even on his deathbed, he declared that anyone who thought the phantom choir was a chorus of angels could never have heard it for themselves. Maybe, just maybe, what each person hears on the wind of the mountain is what they want to hear, or perhaps what they need to hear, or maybe even a reflection of themselves. To learn more about this story, check out Nancy Roberts' North Carolina Ghosts and Legends. There's Mountain Ghost Stories and Curious Tales of Western North Carolina by Janet Barnett and Randy Russell. Check out Ghost Stories in North Carolina by Edric Day. In Haunted North Carolina, Ghost and Strange Phenomena of the Tar Heel State by Patty Wilson.
Wake from your sleep.
This episode was researched and written by Jeffrey Cochran and was produced and hosted by me, Dan Sellers. Special thanks to actor Ian Russell for lending his extraordinary vocal talents to this episode. You can find every episode of the Carolina Haynes podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Or you can listen directly from the feed at carolinahaynes.libsyn.com. As always, you can learn more about us and the Carolina Haynes book by following us on Facebook at facebook.com/Carolina Haynes. There's also our official website, carolinahaynes.com. Feel free to contact us at carolinahaynes@gmail.com. In case you didn't know, Carolina Haynes is bringing legends and lore, historical markers to the Carolinas, starting with Lydia's Bridge in Jamestown. Stay tuned for more information and ways you can be involved. If you'd like to help us, the best way to do it is by joining the team on Patreon. You'll get access to monthly mini episodes and behind-the-scenes looks, and you'll get your very own copy of the Map of Monsters and Legends. All of these perks can be yours exclusively through our membership at Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/Carolina Haynes. Check it out and join us today. We'll be back in 2 weeks with the season finale of the Carolina Haynes podcast. Tune in then to hear more about those things that go bump in the night.
We hope that you choke, that you choke.